Um, just wanted to say again, welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Thanks for joining in for the International Association of Woodcarvers Wood Carving Forum. Just want to do a couple of bits of housekeeping here. Want to thank Larry Green for providing the Zoom software that we're using that's allowing us to have a few more people than the free version so that we can get everybody on. I also wanted to thank Tom Bate, who is kind of hanging in the background there, for setting up the Instagram page, the Facebook page, and the YouTube pages so everybody that wants to rewatch this can watch, or if they miss it, they can watch it later. So Tom, thanks for that. Tom and I have worked quite a bit on trying to get all this set up, so thanks again for all your work, Tom. We want to thank everybody that has presented so far. We feel like this is a good forum. The forum set up by Carvers for Carvers, so this is as much your all's forum as it is ours. Feel free to ask questions and gain as much information from it as you can. Today we have Rich Embling. Did I pronounce that right, Rich?
Yeah, that's right.
From Wales in the UK. He goes by the Urban Tinker for anybody who has seen him on Instagram and Facebook. He'll be discussing his carving journey and talking about his walking sticks and marionettes. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rick.
Nothing, I'm just.
Yeah, so you can hear
thank
it, you
you
can talk. Yeah, now your audio's on, so you may want to mute.
Are we muted?
Yeah, you're good, Rich. Go ahead.
All right, excellent. Okay, so first of all, I'd just like to say thank you to you guys for asking me to do this today. I've been carving a good few years. I started when I was 14 years of age, and I'm 37. So, you know, I've kind of done different things, and I do feel honoured to be asked to be involved in this, and I love watching this every week that I've seen this. So thanks again for asking us to do this, Blake, and the rest of you guys as well. I really appreciate it. So, so what I thought I'd do is I'd kind of introduce myself and explain a bit about me, and then go into what I do and so on. So, like Blake says, my name is Richard Embling, and on social media I go by the name Urban Tinker, and I'll explain a little bit why that's the kind of call I go by, or the name I go by in the last couple of years. A little bit later when I go into a bit more detail with things. But basically, like I say, I started carving when I was about 13, 14 years of age. And as a teenager, there was a local wood turn-in, wood carving, spoon carving club near me in South Wales. And basically, it was on a Monday evening, and I attended it for a few years. And then I basically started whittling and got into wood carving, and from there I got hooked and I absolutely loved it. So then weirdly, I have the knife here that I actually was the first knife I ever started with, which is a little Mora. I don't think it's a 106, I think it's a 120, Mora 120. But basically this was the first knife I started with and got hooked, and then from there started carving all random sticks to start off with. My main focus was walking sticks, because there was a couple of older gents in the club who were really interested in it. Me being a teenager, I saw the animals they were carving on top of hiking sticks and canes, and I just got interested. So the first bit of carving I ever did was I carved a fox out of a piece of European beech, and with the knife I showed you guys, and it took me months and months, because I was brand new to it. I'd never done anything like this before. I'd always been interested in arts and crafts and things, and playing around with wood and what have you. My dad was a carpenter until he retired, so you know that was kind of in my blood. And then, yeah, I just started carving sticks, and I went from there. And then I joined a group called the South Wales Stick Makers, who have competitions and so on each time, you know, a couple of times through the year, and I went from there really with my stick carving. So yeah, then I trained and I went to university and so on, And I don't do this full time now. My carving is my hobby. I'm a full-time lecturer in a university in South Wales, and I teach prop making for film and theatre. So I essentially do things from moulding, casting, bits of blacksmithing, fiberglassing, painting, anything that is related to theatre, TV or film, making props. And that's what I trained in. I did it in London for a few years, and then I decided to go into teaching 8 years ago, and I've been doing this since. So really, my wood carving has always been in the background as a hobby and my way of switching off at the end of the day. And then about 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to go on some wood carving training that would link to my job within education. So I got some government funding to go and train. I teach puppetry as part of my job, so I wanted to combine my interest in wood carving and my job doing puppetry and prop making together. So I decided to learn how to make wooden puppets. And then about 5 years ago, I attended a couple of workshops in the UK with a well-known puppet maker called John Roberts, who used to work for Little Angel puppet company in the UK. And then the last 2 years, I spent 20-something days last summer and the summer before in Prague, training with the company called Puppets in Prague, with a guy called Merrick and his wife Leah, and learned how to do marionette carving with them in their way. So that's really how my journey has evolved a little bit, to be honest. And then last summer, I decided I'd start doing some smaller whittles and started getting into following a lot of the American kind of smaller scale carvings that are in like Wood Carving Illustrated and things like that. And that's how I ended up where I am today, essentially. So yeah, and from, like I say, that's how my kind of path and my journey went with wood carving. I don't know how you guys want to do this, because I do have some examples, physical examples here, and I also have some PowerPoint presentation that I could kind of show you guys photos and things with. But if you have any questions or anything, just fire them out as I go along, and I'll try and give you the most clear, honest answer I can think of there and then we'll go from there. So I think what happened with my stick making and my wood carving in that way, when I was doing my stick making, I was very much interested in wildlife. I had a lot around me at the time, growing up. And then when I went away to university and to study to become a lecturer and so on, my kind of journey changed. I ended up in the city and what have you. And because of this, I was still trying to do my carvings and still do my stick making and so on. But I was venturing in a little bit of wood turning, and I was interested in learning how to make my own knives and so on. So I started tinkering in other bits and pieces. And then a friend of mine said to me, "Oh, you should set up like a social media page." And that's where the whole Urban Tinker kind of branding came from, where I was doing bits of puppetry, bits of wood turning, bits of knife making and tool making, and stick making and so on. And it all kind of happened from me tinkering with different bits and pieces, really. And that's where my branding came from. And now I actually live in a very small town in South Wales, but I still keep the branding. A friend of mine designed it for me, and that's essentially that with that. So a couple of things that I wanted to just talk to you guys about with my sticks and things. I carve pretty much any wood. Like I say, the first bit of carving I ever did was on a piece of beech, and it was solid. It was really difficult, but I think at the time I was learning with a gentleman who I don't think is alive anymore, unfortunately, called Peter. I forgot his surname, but I remembered him as Peter all the time. Big bushy beard, and basically he got me starting carving on beech and ash, because I think he wanted me to understand how to sharpen a knife, and the fact that the knife got dull very quickly because the wood was so difficult to carve. And also with the hardwoods, I couldn't take off large chunks of material. So it allowed me to kind of make loads of mistakes. And, you know, I cut myself, and I kind of cut the ear off the fox, and then I kind of glued it back on, and then the tail got smaller, and then where it joined the shank, that got distorted, and so on. So, you know, it was a learning curve. And then from there, I like I say, I started doing more and more things. And I primarily focused around cats, dogs, birds, wildlife, that kind of stuff. I wasn't really interested in characters at the time on canes. And I think the English or the British way of making a walking stick is kind of different to the American way as well in some respects. I see a lot of American stick makers or stick dressers making walking sticks, and they carve all through the stick, through the actual cane, right through the top of the handle and so on. But in the UK, we tend not to touch the actual shank, the stick, we just carve the tops. So, and then we join them separate. If we're fortunate to find a stick that has a large enough mass of material on top to carve in, we'll use it, but 90% of the time we add it. So, you know, to give you guys some examples, if I just click on share my screen and go into my presentation. So some of the stuff I've done, so this obviously isn't my early stuff. This is some stuff I've been doing over the last 7 or 5 years or something like that. So I'm quite, can everyone see my screen, by the way? Can I just check? Yeah, all good. So like I say, usually the shank is this part here. This is what we refer to as the shank, and then this is the topper. We join these with a piece of threaded rod. This one's just a head I carved and never put it on an actual stick. But basically, I was really keen on trying to capture wildlife as most accurate I could. I know there's a lot of bird carvers out there and a lot of wildlife carvers, but for me, the challenge was I wanted to try and get as accurate as I possibly could. So they're all carved with knives, and then sanded and used rifflers or small files. And then basically from this, then I carve the texture into them and paint them and join them to the stick. So to give you guys some idea, this one is actually made out of lime. So you can see the color lime that we get is quite dark. I'll show you another example, a physical one later. This one's out of a piece of cedar of Lebanon. This one's out of a piece of apple. I'm quite fond on carving fruit wood. I like all the different colors and things that run through the fruit wood. A lot of the knives I've made in the past, when I forged the little blades in them, I wanted a pretty handle to go on them, so I've used fruit woods for handles.
Rich?
They don't make any difference, to be fair. It's the same as sticking them on a 2x4 or something, but it's just your preference at the end of the day. This is a piece of lime again. And then what tended to happen was, as my stick making kind of experience and journey evolved, I started using different materials. So I managed to get hold of some buffalo horn, some ram's horn, some bits of deer antler, and then I started carving those as well. So I started moving away from the traditional way of carving with hand chisels and knives and things, and started power carving using Dremels and small micromotors with a little oscillating, grinding tips in and so on. So this is carved out of a piece of buffalo horn. I bent it in shape with heat first because the buffalo horns are huge. I couldn't find one in the shed earlier to show you guys, unfortunately. But when I got into this element of my carving journey a couple of years ago, I decided that I wanted to, rather than just do a static, it was around this time after I'd done a few dogs for clients and customers and so on. And it was around this time that I thought I didn't want to just do things symmetrical and have them just looking like dead with no life in them, because they just look like they're focused in one direction and everything's balanced on both sides. And I started thinking about my sculptures and my carvings a bit more, and then I thought I'd really like to capture like the essence of the animal or the bird or something in my actual carvings. So I decided to start pushing the boundaries a little bit myself and trying to get expression and life into my carvings, so they just didn't look static. So, you know, I tried to capture the dog panting with the wet tongue and the wet nose. So the rest of it is all matte, and then I've just picked out the shiny bits. And then from this, I pushed it further, and I wanted to capture a bird collecting the worms to feed its young and so on. So this one, like I say, is this is buffalo horn, and then these worms are carved individually, power carved individually, and then they're inserted into the beak afterward on a plate. So the beak is hollow like this, and then a plate of material goes in, and then you carve the worms out of the material, and then it's secure. Sorry if I speak super fast, by the way, okay? I think it's the Welsh in me, just speed talk. So at this point, I was still really interested in trying to make things look a bit more realistic, so I bought a pyrography pen, and I started wanting to kind of capture the detail of the fur a bit more. And then the mouse on the left-hand side of the screen is an older carving, and the pug, little pug dog on the right-hand side of the screen is a newer carving. And this was where I started to experiment with wood burning a bit more. And I know a lot of wildlife carvers use this, and a lot of people have pyrography machines and they burn in their cuts to make the kind of shadow lines pop and so on. But just to kind of give you guys an idea of the direction I went in, I still use my pyrography pen, but all the coloring on the pug on the right-hand side of the page is all burnt in with a blowtorch. So, and I've got the small blowtorch here. If I stop share, so I use these tiny little, you know, I have a larger creme brulee cook's torch for cooking food. These are little windproof cigarette lighters. So they're tiny, they have a little click on the side, and then you can just see the flame catching a little bit, I think, on there. And they're much more easier to control because they're really small. And I used to buy these from a market. I now buy them off eBay by like the 100 because it's easier to buy them in bulk, and then they're a bit of a fiddly pain in the bum to refill. So it's easier to do them that way because they're really super cheap. So yeah, I started getting into burning with coloring my carvings and so on. So at this point then, like I say, I can't show you guys on screen, but I think Larry's got the my Instagram account up on his page. And basically I wanted to push it further. So I'd done the bird with the worms in the mouth, and I'd done some other characters. I did a lion roaring, and an elephant with his trunk coming up like it was going to spray water over itself. And then a friend of mine gave me some deer antler, and it got me thinking about, you know, when deers go into the rut and they fight with one another and so on, and call out to their mates. So that's when I made this this stick with the antlers on top of it, and I put the really heavy fur texture. I don't know if Larry can pull this up on my page. There's one image on my Instagram page, I think, on there. Unfortunately, guys, I can't access it on the laptop. I'm borrowing this laptop from work, and it's got some kind of administration issue with it that won't allow me to do access any personal accounts or anything. But yeah, basically, so if you can see on this one here, so basically I wanted to look like it was calling. So I tried to capture that essence of life in it, and I also did this pig as well. But with the stag, the plan was that I knew that the antlers would become a bit of an issue with using the cane for walking, but also being super kind of fragile, and if it fell out of your hand, it hit the floor, and that'd be the end of the antlers if they were made out of wood. So this one's actually made out of something called tiger wood. The whole head's made out of tiger wood. The antlers are actually made out of antler. So I had the palmate, the flat section off the deer antler, and I carved that into miniature antlers using little diamond burrs and power carving and so on. And then it's inserted in the top of the head with a dowel. You can just see where the coronet touches the top of the head. And this is probably the stick I'm most proud of to date, to be fair. I've got a couple of sticks at my mum and dad's house, my first ever sticks, and I wish I could have got them here. But because of the lockdown, I haven't unfortunately been able to do so. Just to show you guys how much I've come on in the years, and how, you know, we all start somewhere, you know. So that's really it with my sticks. If I go back to the page and show you guys, so this is a bull I'm working on at the moment. Can you guys just about see the shape of it? So the one common thing that I wanted to talk about, which I know that Sarah touched on last week, was Sarah uses like mixed materials in her carving. So she incorporates wire quite a lot into her pieces, and so on. What I tend to incorporate quite a lot into my pieces with my carvings is horn or antler. So if I was to do this Hereford bull, let me go try it again. This Hereford bull here, I've drilled holes in the side of the head, and that's where I would then make my horns separate. And these are made out of cow horn. So I was fortunate to have a large cow horn given to me from a local farmer, and I've carved a little shoulder on there, and then that gets inserted and glued into the hole like so, and that's how I get the horns to kind of work for me. And the good thing is that because they're actually made out of horn, all I have to do is a very fine wash of paint over the top of them just to make them look a bit weathered, and they'll actually look quite realistic because they are the real thing. So that's how I tend to do my sticks. I'm a fan of a sloping joint. This is just my own preference. When I first started, I used to do a complete straight join where the shank touched the bottom of the stick, and I'd insert a threaded rod in it, or a big screw or a dowel or something. But as I've been doing it more and more, I just prefer the aesthetics of the angle on the joint. I use a combination of hand tools and power carving when I do a walking stick, but I use how can I say, I tend to do both of them, but over the last couple of years, I've started to do less and less power carving. I'm an asthmatic, and I'm finding that the fine dust, as good as my instruction system is in the workshop, is just wearing me down. So I've started going back to more traditional carving techniques, you know, using your little veiners and your V tools for doing your texture and your fur and hair and things like that, and of course your knives and your gouges. You know, like I say, the first knife I ever owned was this one, and I still use it occasionally. This little Mora. It's great for roughing out because it's so thick. I've got other knives. I've got OCC tools. I've got Helveys. I've got the ones I made myself. I trained with I did like a couple of days with a blacksmith in Wales called Nick Westerman, who's a well-known green woodworking tool maker. So he makes like scoops and scorps and bowl knives and curved knives and anything for doing green woodworking. So I have a few of his tools and things. I use trusty old Stanley knife, you know. I use what works, whatever works, you know. But this is the first gouge I ever got. So I bought I had a flex cut gouge set for my 13th or 14th birthday off my mum and dad. Had 3 snap tools in it, and the little handle with the metal bit that protruded out of it. I don't even think they make them like this anymore. I think it's all housed inside now. And I still go back to this occasionally. And I find them great for portable kit and so on. With regards to my paints, I use craft paints, acrylic paints. I've used watercolors if I want a really subtle tone. On the 2 that Larry brought up, they both painted with acrylic paints by hand. On my, if I just put him back up again. Okay, so this is actually painted with water-based acrylic paints, just watered down very thin, and a combination of pyrography and burning. This one's actually stains, so I use spirit stains quite often. The reason I use spirit stains on my canes is if they're taking them out into you're taking them for a walk, or they're going to wear and they're going to get weathered. So I find that the spirit stain actually becomes like one with the wood. It actually sucks into the capillaries of the wood and doesn't wear off or chip off or rub off. So it's far more hard wearing. So, you know, this little Jack Russell Terrier here, this is done with, I use antique pine for the brindled areas. And then I added a small amount of like a cedar stain or a red teak or something, or red oak to the areas around the eyes to make them pop a bit more. And a bit of dark oak to the ears, mix the stains together. They're just spirit-based stains. They're for wood turning, the ones I use. They're in very small bottles by a brand called Chestnut Products. And then I buy white stain then. Obviously, the white stain's the one spirit stain that is the most difficult to achieve the finish you'd want, because the white's very, very thin. So when you keep applying it over the top of your if you look, this apple's quite dark when you can just see below the neck of the animal. So this apple's quite dark. So to get this, sorry, this jumped one. To get this color the same as the white white lighter than this color, you have to apply multiple coats. So I may have gone in there with later on with a bit of white acrylic paint just to pick it out. I can't remember, to be honest with you. It's my old dog, and it's now on my mum and dad's house. That's it. So yeah, this is acrylic paints. This is done with little model makers enamels. So horn, antler, buffalo horn doesn't take paint very easily. So what I find is thinning down model enamels for toy trains. If you're painting trains, little metal trains, and you use those little enamels in the tiny tins, that we get them over here in little tiny tins from Humbrol or Ravel, I think it is. They thin down with enamel thinners, and they bond really well to the horn. Acrylic paints just chip off. So that's what I use on that. And I get a combination of burning, and like the pug's been left like this, I just sealed underneath the bottom of the neck and left the lime, the actual color of its natural wood, and just burned the rest of the details in. The only other thing, I guess, guys, to talk about my sticks about is I tend to, in the past, I've always put glass eyes in my animals. So I would carve an animal, then take out an eye socket, put an eye in, use some epoxy-based sculpting material, and sculpt the lid on top and bottom. And some people, you know, that works really well for them. Some people are like, oh, that's cheating, you should have carved the eye in, and so on. I think it is personal preference with it. I've started carving eyes in to my carvings, but I just like the shine and the luster and the life that a glass eye brings to it, because it's got depth. And this is something that I've taken from my stick making and applied into my puppets, because, and I'll show you that when I move on to them in a bit, I like that shiny glassy eye. I just think it looks alive, and adds to the realism of it. Any questions?
Yeah, Rich, what do you use to finish your sticks with? Because obviously they look really matte. I'm wondering, I'm guessing it's not a varnish or anything.
It's a matte lacquer. So I used to use a satin lacquer, and then a friend of mine about a year ago said, you should use matte and then get a really high gloss shank, or up to under the neck, where I always leave a bit of wood exposed, like at the bottom of the pug in front of you now. And basically I go gloss right up to there, and then I do matte over the actual finish of the color. Because I just find then with the glass eyes, it gives that extra kind of level of realism. I don't know. It's different. It's like when I do a bird, if I'm doing a blackbird, I'll spray with satin because it has a little bit of a shine and luster in it. But it all depends on the actual animal or subject I'm doing. I used to use polyurethane varnish to go over the actual sticks, the shanks. And about 3 years ago, a friend of mine gave me a bottle of gun stock oil for gun butts, wooden gun butts, and I'd never used that before. And I used it, and it changed everything with my stick. So I don't use polyurethane anymore. I just use, if I'm doing something where I've got a stick to go out, and there's a lot of rain in Wales, so you've got to have something that makes sure that stick doesn't rot. I think we've had our summer. We had a couple of days of sunshine, so that's our summer. It's going to rain the rest of the time now.
I'm with you on that one, mate. I'm in Cornwall down the road from you, and I know every time I've done a stick, it's either had to be like a heavy varnish or it just runs straight off. But yeah, I'll try the lacquer.
I find the gun stock oils brilliant. I use a brand by Birchwood Casey, I think it is, called a True Oil, and I just literally rub it on my finger. So I just dip my finger into the pot of True Oil, rub it back and forth onto the shank, do a couple of coats, key in between each coat, and it's solid. I've got a couple of blackthorn sticks I've taken out when I walk my terrier to the woods, and they've gone down the river, and the other side they've come out and they're fine. They've not started to chip or decay or anything. So, okay.
Awesome. Cheers. Yeah.
Hey, Rich, one other question. We have somebody asking if you have your first carving.
No, it's at my mum and dad's house, unfortunately. I tell you what I'll do. I'll post my first carving, a picture of my first carving, once we're out of lockdown in the UK. When I get a chance to visit my folks, I'll put a picture of it up. I think it's actually my third carving. I think I sold my first carving so I could, if I remember correctly, so I could buy myself a pair of like cool skater trainers, because I was about 15 years of age, if I remember correctly. But I don't have all of my earlier ones. I think I have the third carving I did, because it was of a greyhound or a lurcher dog's head on top of a walking stick, and I won the best novice category with it. So my dad was over the moon. So he was like, "Oh, I'm keeping that stick." So it's at my mum and dad's, unfortunately. So yeah, and I can't get a picture. They're a bit of technophobes. Yeah, so there's no chance of a picture. So yeah, that's kind of it with my sticks. I can happily answer any questions if you guys think about it as we move on and things.
Richard, will you be talking about your marionettes?
That's what I'm just about to do now. I thought I'd split it and do half hour on my sticks and the rest on the marionettes. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, excellent. So, move this stuff out the way. Okay, so like I said, basically what happened was I was doing my carvings and my sticks, and I got this opportunity to go and do some training. So the first puppet I did, I managed to go, and go on a course with a puppet maker called John Roberts. And the first puppet I did was an orangutan, because the weird story, but the reason this is there is there's a Clint Eastwood film with orangutan called Clyde in it. Is it called Every Which Way Is Loose? I'm not 100% sure. But I was watching that film one afternoon with my niece, and she said, "Oh, you should do a puppet of a monkey or a gorilla or orangutan when you go on your course." So I didn't really have an idea. So this is what I ended up making when I went there. This is the first marionette I ever did. And I think I tried running before I could kind of walk with it, to be completely honest, because I knew quite a bit about puppetry, as it was part of my job and my training, but making a puppet out of wood, I didn't know a great deal about. So he gave me, John gave me a male template and said, "This is how you make a simple male template," and then took the template off me and said, "An orangutan doesn't work like a human being. They walk differently. Their proportions are different." So basically, I had to kind of start from literally the bottom with it. But I wanted to try and get as much movement in it and articulation as possible. So yeah, I kind of run before I could walk with this, really. But just to give you guys an idea, so this is actually made out of a majority of it's mixed. It's two materials. So I don't know if you can see the ever so subtle difference between the color of the wood here and the color of the wood here. But this wood is the gelatin wood that I spoke about earlier, Anthony. And this is the lime then. So the top half of the body's lime, the head's lime, and the feet are lime, the hands are lime, and then the bottom of the belly and the legs. I think that's lime, and then that's gelatin. And the reason that John taught me to do it this way was he trained with well-known makers in his day, and he spent some time, I think it was in China, learning traditional Chinese or Japan, I can't remember what it was, but he made these beautiful oriental puppets, and they use gelatin, and they use it quite a lot in pattern making, or traditionally in model making and pattern making, and it's super easy to carve. It's the rubber plant. It's harder than balsa wood, but softer than lime, so it's quicker to kind of carve with. So that's why he uses that. And then for any detail elements, he uses lime. So stuff like hands, they use that a lot. This is a better picture, I think. You can see the difference in the color here quite a lot. So yeah, I kind of started with this, and I worked endlessly on it over the 6 days I was on the course. It was a 6 or 7 day course. And I finished for the day and went back to my digs and my lodges where I was staying and carved there until late in the night. And then before I went in the course the next day, I carved, because I wanted to try and get this puppet finished in 6 days. And I was being ridiculous because it just didn't happen. So this is the upper part of the body made of gelatin. And I just put this in there, guys, to kind of show you something I didn't realize. So I'm used to working in a lot of foam for making puppets. And of course, foam is light. As soon as you start carving in wood, even if it's small, it still has a fair amount of weight to it. Well, imagine you're doing a small little carving this big and then your puppet's this big, you know, the weight's so much heavier. So if you're operating it all the time, you're going to get very tired. So to make this easier, the traditional English way of making marionettes is to hollow out your puppet. So this is the chest section that's been split down the center. The block at the bottom of it, by here, is just a holding block. And then I've used a Forstner bit to drill out this area and then go in with a gouge. and hollow it out more. And that was the end result. So basically what happened was I really wanted to make these hands move in the middle, but I should have just done a standard hand as a to begin with, because the hands took me probably the longest to carve out of all of the puppet, even the head. I was quite quick with the head. I used glass eyes in it, so I took inspiration from my stick making and put those in it, and then I went from there really. But this little mortise and tenon join, I hadn't done any traditional carpentry or joining or mortise and tenons or any of that kind of stuff since, you know, I was in secondary school or something, doing, you know, tech class, wood class or something. So it was a bit of a kind of reminder of how accurate you have to be with things like that when I started making my puppets. So yeah, this is what I ended up with. So he's just been painted with acrylic paints, and I just painted it with a sponge just to kind of give it a bit more texture. So I had 4 or 5 different washes of acrylic paints mixed up, slightly thicker than what I usually do wash wise, and I just ripped up a normal bath sponge or a household sponge and sponged the colors on at the same time. And then I managed to find a cushion in a charity shop or a thrift store around here. So I just basically ripped the cushion cover off it, bought it. It's made out of Mongolian fur and it's real. It's the most expensive bit of fur on that puppet I think I could have found. But I use synthetic stuff a lot now anyway. And the reason I put the flamingo on the other side is this is a project I've been running with my students for a few years, and this is a one-day build. I give them 2 days, but by the second day they've completely finished. And this is basically the puppet I should have started with. So it's far more simpler. It's essentially just a couple of strings rather than all the complicated strings that are on Clyde. And this is the kind of puppet that I'm planning on doing some live Facebook sessions with. So this is the kind of thing that I'm going to be doing with it, but I just thought I'd put it in. And this is painted with household emulsions. So I just went to my local DIY store and got tester pots. I took in a photograph of a cartoon flamingo and said, can you color match all these for me? So I didn't have to mix them. And then all my students made them, so they were all uniform. And then the second puppet I made, so the flamingo is one of my most recent ones, just because it's a really super quick, good fun project to do. The second puppet I made was when I went out into Prague. And the one thing I noticed straight away that was different in Prague to when I was working with English puppet makers was the puppets are different. The puppets are bigger in the Czech Republic. So that basically when they're being used, the performances are different. And this is a traditional Czech puppet that could be used on the street. So, you know, it's large. To give you guys a kind of idea of how big. This is Festa, by the way. I name all my puppets because I'm a loon. But if I just stop this a second. Okay, so this is the puppet. The only way I can describe her is when it's on the floor, it goes up to about, I don't know, 8 inches above my knee. I'm 5'10". You know, I'm thinking it's two and a half foot maybe. And basically the difference with the Czech marionettes is the hand control, which is basically on a wire. So you can see this big rigid wire that runs through here. Sorry if the light's bleaching her out a little bit. And if I just sit back down and go back to that screen because there's some more stuff. So yeah, this is, you can see the big wire going through the top of the head. And the wire basically means that the puppet has a lot more strength going through the head, so it's not solely solely kind of hung on and supported on strings. And the wire basically makes it easier to maneuver. So this is how the traditional ones kind of do. You can kind of see on the image on the left that the wire goes right through the head, and there's a loop on the bottom of it, and that loop essentially goes into the body and then allows the head to turn back and forth with a pin holding it there. So that's how it kind of traps in the body. You can't really see it, but the pin is there that it goes through the center of the chest to hold it in the actual altogether. And the same thing again, I'm really interested in using mixed materials. The one thing I've learned a lot with puppetry is that leather is your friend. So you get leather cordage, you get flat pieces of leather, you know. So just to kind of give you that's a traditional English joint, puppet joint using leather. So that's just a strip of leather, a cut into both parts, and then the leather is just glued in so that it bends like so. This is if you don't want to do a mortise and tenon. Obviously the most traditional joint is like a traditional furniture mortise and tenon joint, either a through tenon or a half tenon or something. And basically this is like a quicker, easier way to do it. This is how I do my arm joint on a lot of my marionettes, because it's like a good elbow and gives me lots of freedom. And just to give you guys a secret, this is the secret of successful puppetry. It's all in the sound. If it makes that clacking sound, you've got enough movement in it.
Richard, we can't see what you're trying to show with the leather. Can you show us that?
If I can kind of, how's that?
No, we're still seeing the presentation.
It's your screen share.
This is my bad. I'm getting confused. I thought I was on my home screen. Apologies.
No worries. Thank you, sir.
No, that's my bad. Sorry, I'm new to this. So yeah, this is like an elbow joint where it has a piece of leather sandwiched in two cuts. So you have a cut in the top, a cut in the bottom. It allows the arm to go up and down. There's the sound. Sorry, there's the visual. Okay, but that's how I learned with John in the UK how to do an elbow joint. Then when I went to the Czech Republic, their elbow joints, I don't actually have a arm, but they use this material. So this is leather cordage. This is like 1/4 inch round leather cordage, and basically they tend to use this a lot more. So if I pick up my puppet, and I don't think you're going to be able to see it, just on the shoulder there is a little leather joint on the shoulder there which allows it to move. So, and I can actually lift up the arm. Can you see that big staple that's in the side? That's what holds the head on. If I pulled that staple out, the head would come out of the hollow hole that's in the chest, and then all my stringing would be useless and I'd have to restring it. So I'm not going to pull that staple out. So the other big thing that I noticed about the puppets in the Czech Republic was that they can basically sit like this. So you don't actually have to support them. The way they're engineered, see how straight that leg is with the bottom. So basically, this is designed so that it can't go up any higher, so it can actually sit on the stage. Where the English marionettes that I've learned to do, they just, because they're strung as well, they just collapse. Well, that wire in the head because it runs down into here, actually acts like a spine. So you can actually sit that on a stage and leave it, and then pick another puppet up and operate it. So they're different, you know, they're a different style to them. But this is very traditional Czech, this one. They love their devils. So, sorry about that, by the way. Let's go back. So yeah, excellent. So I've just put this one in because last week I briefly touched with you guys about painting. And this was the paint effect I discussed last week. So this is where it's got ink mixed in with the acrylic washes, and then it's painted over. It's been primed. If you just look, you can just see at the top of the screen where it says L and R on the joints of the legs. It's slightly pale white in color. That's actually that sealer that I discussed last week, which was a mixture of white household emulsion, water-based emulsion, white craft glue, and water until it's like a really thin milk consistency. And you just prime your sculpt or your puppet with that, and then paint it. I quite like the idea of taking sandpaper back to my puppets and rubbing through the layers of color, and then staining over the top. So this has been rubbed through here, the red, and then I put a wash of yellow over the top of it. And then this has been rubbed through here, and then I put a wash of yellow over the top of it. So it kind of had that ember glowing kind of effect. Is everyone still seeing the screen? I haven't messed up yet. Cool. So then I made my fourth puppet and my third puppet. I'm not going to go through them all, don't worry. But I'm nearly at the end of what my slideshow essentially, guys. But my third puppet I made is an X-rated puppet. So she's hanging in the window. I'll show it to you guys at the end. I'm hoping there's not going to offend or upset anyone. But I decided I wanted to make essentially like a lap dancer puppet and do like a comedy short with it. So she's hanging in the window. I'll show you Busty Lulu later. But basically, from there I went to this one, which was my second most recent puppet, which was the next one I did in Prague. So this was the Mad Hatter, and I'm currently starting to do designs for Alice and the rabbit and so on, just because I was interested in it. But I was really interested in the leather working side of things, so I learned how to make the hat through YouTube, essentially. I learned how to make a foam hat, and then I hand stitched it together, you know. So that was where the leather thing came in and the dressing of it and so on. And then I think this, guys, is my last slide. Yeah, so this was the most recent puppet I've carved to date. So this is Humpty Dumpty from the nursery rhyme. Basically, the reason I put this in there was I wanted to explain to you guys about a little something that Dave Stenson started talking about in his video yesterday about shape and form. And the one thing I've learned quite a lot when I'm doing puppets is to try and have a consistent shape or form that is a theme throughout my piece. So obviously this is an egg, so it's very difficult to kind of think, right, I've got body forms to make, how am I going to make this work? So I actually made the hands egg shaped, like oval shaped, and then I really wanted my Humpty Dumpty to have pointed shoes on. So I took the shapes of the lips, and then I made the feet in the shape of the lips. So the idea was that I'm looking for that idea of one shape in something and repeating it all the way through. And without me realizing, I've been doing it throughout my puppets for years. So with my devil's very spiky and sharp. The elbows are sharp, the shoulders are sharp, the nose is sharp, the ears are sharp, the horns are sharp. And it's just something that I guess from years and years of watching Disney and all the different animations they do, I've just picked up on their technique. Because basically with Disney characters, all they do is incorporate certain shapes into their characters to portray something. So if you're thinking of a sharp, angular character like Scar, the lion, the bad lion, the villain from Lion King, he's very sharp, and then Mufasa's very rounded and strong and puffy. And I've realized I've started combining a little bit of this without me realizing subconsciously into my actual carvings. So I've even started doing on my smaller pieces. If I do some pumpkins, I've taken Larry's pumpkin pattern from Wood Carving Illustrated a few years ago, and I've changed that and added my own kind of approach and things to that. It's still essentially the same process, but it's just got my kind of spin on it. So I think I'm starting to develop my own personal style to things, and I think that can be a good thing, but it can be a bad thing at the same time, because it doesn't always work. But I do have the last puppet, so Humpty Dumpty. I do have him here. So this is Humpty Dumpty. And the reason I wanted to show you guys this one was obviously there's the egg shape, there's the egg-shaped hand, there's the lip-shaped shoe. But what I wanted to show you this one was I've started to use leather and incorporate that into different bits. So I've used the tongue of the shoe, the little leather tongue here, so it doesn't restrict the bend in the foot. But the reason I want to show you this, guys, is basically I'm doing this for a show where Humpty Dumpty breaks in two. So he's on the wall, he goes back and forth, and then he splits open like so, and he's hollow inside, and then snaps back together. And the idea is that when I finish this, I'm going to do a short animated video, hopefully, and all the king's horses and all the king's men are going to be inside him as miniature puppets. So the idea is that this will split open and all the other puppets will come out and try and fix him. And sadly, they don't succeed. And then he's just left there. So I thought I'd show you this one. And in the same kind of way that I wanted to start to try getting life in my carving, my wildlife carvings or my walking sticks, I wanted to do the same really with my puppets. So that's why I've started doing things like this with movement, and I did this one here, which is a nice little clown puppet where his arms move back and forth, and he's on a unicycle. So as the unicycle goes around, his legs go. So I'm still kind of, this is the kind of stuff I'm doing, but incorporating other materials. This isn't my beard, even though it does look like it. This is yak hair that I've started to use. I sourced that online. So yeah, that's kind of my puppet journey really with that. I've got obviously the Mad Hatters behind me. The other thing which I picked up on quite a lot from the difference from the Czech puppets to the British puppets is basically the Czech puppets traditionally have an open hand and a closed hand, because traditionally they used to be stuff like knights and soldiers, so they used to have swords and axes and things in there. So you have one hand that's like that, and then you have the other hand that is like this. And traditional Czech puppets only have 3 fingers and a thumb, where English marionettes have your full digits. Okay, I don't know how good this is going to show you guys, but this is my last puppet, and then that's me done. Fire your questions to me then, if you have any, please do. So this is my dancer puppet. the light's really bleaching her out. But basically, the idea was that I wanted to do a puppet that could kick her height, so that when I do try and get her to actually do a dance in a show, she can then move, bend over, kind of her arms come out. It's very difficult for me to operate it on this camera, and the lighting isn't great. Is that better? Yeah. But yeah, the idea was that I wanted to try and get her to do as much movement as I could, so we could do a dance with her if it was for a music video, for a laugh or something like that. But yeah, this was in a big knotted bundle in a bag in the back of my workshop, and I found her this afternoon and thought I'll bring her out. Sorry if it offends anyone, but it's only a bit of fun. And it's a puppet. So yeah, essentially this one's like multi-string. This has got, let's look, this has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's got 12 strings on it. It's very difficult to operate. I can get one leg to kick up and then up like this when I operate it, but I can't do the other leg because I just don't have the muscle memory, I think, when I'm operating it. So yeah, it's quite challenging to operate. Where these puppets are super easy to operate, because you literally, I'll show you in a second, but you turn, you get them to walk really easy. And all that is just moving the handpiece left to right. But yeah, so yeah, that's kind of what I do on my puppets and things. Does anyone have any questions with those? Was that interesting? Has everyone just switched off and gone, oh, I'm so bored?
Hey, Rich, you spoke of teaching classes. How often do you teach classes?
I do. The problem is I do my classes for my puppets and my woodworking when I'm not actually teaching classes for my job full time. So it's usually in my summer break, or at Christmas time. I always teach Santa classes. So I carve Santas on the corner, and I do like a 1-day Santa carving course where people come down and I give them like a 6-inch 2x2 cut on the corner or something, and we carve Santa heads. I'm going to be doing a class next year, hopefully, where I do a smaller marionette, like this kind of size, in a similar Czech kind of way, so it can sit down. And then rather than going for it with all the jointing on the arms, I just use a piece of cord, leather cordage for an arm, and so on, or maybe something like this. I don't know. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Rich, I'm loving this. I was, I was getting kind of serious about trying to do marionettes, and then realized that carving them's one thing, but operating them's a whole nother ball game.
I'm not a puppeteer in any shape or form.
Try to keep the strings untangled. That's the hard part.
Just a little thing. I heard that you can maybe confirm this for me, that puppets haven't been a real big deal here in the States like they are in Europe. But we've always had freedom of speech here, and not necessarily so in European countries, but puppets could do anything they wanted, and people would use their puppets for political.
Yeah. Well, there was the whole TV series of latex puppets back in the 80s of Spit and Image, where they could be, really rude and political and get away with murder kind of thing. So it's quite funny. I take my puppets to some demos and shows, and especially the lady puppet that I've been working on, the female puppet, and the reaction I get, and I think it's going to like offend people, and people come on, can I pick it up? Can I have a photo with it? And all this it's really strange. And like, I have a young niece and nephew, and an older niece, but my younger niece and nephew, because they've been around puppets with me their entire lives essentially, and they're like 3 and 5. They don't get freaked out, but they actually like clap while I get them to walk across the room to them and things. And when I was a child, I was terrified of puppets. So I don't know why I've ended up making them. I was really freaked out. So it's I don't know.
Like a clown phobia.
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I was freaked out by The Labyrinth with David Bowie in it, with the little puppets in it. And now that's like my all-time favorite film, and so it's really strange. But yeah, the whole thing with like the getting away with murder with what they say is so right. Just blame the puppet. It wasn't me. Excellent.
And you mentioned you might you thought we might have trouble understanding your speech pattern or whatever. I think you're a lot easier to understand than some of those guys we have over here from South Carolina. But
I with my accent, I speak quite quickly and I'm quite nasally, I think. So it's sometimes when people ask me things, or I use like slang terms, like we all do from where we're from. So yeah, I was just a bit worried with regards to that, really. But I'm glad you guys got it.
Yeah, we did like timber yard. That's something I had not heard before. We call him a lumber yard over here. So to hear him call it timber yard is something different.
I was trying to think. Yeah, I'm just gonna nip to like, I don't know, B&Q or something, and I was like, do they have B&Q? Shall I say like department store? What do I say? Lowe's, is that what it is? I don't know. I'm trying to work out the different things. It's quite funny, there's different little kind of terminologies and things, and also with like the whole knife things. I know I'm not trying to promote different companies better than others, just from my own experience, but I've had some stuff from the guys at Helvey over the past. I've obviously, as you know, Blake, I've picked up some knives off Blake, his signature series and stuff. And I've just realized the big difference between the grinds on your guys' tools to the tools that I'm used to using. So I think I'm used to the Scandi grind a lot more, where it's shorter here, and then there's a flat. And the knives I'm used to using are fairly thick. I'm talking like, 3.2 mil thick. And then I got my first knife, which was a Blake signature series rough out knife, and it's much thinner. And I think the whole thing straight away changed a little bit for me, because I am used to using thicker knives. My main knife I featured on my terrible live video from the other evening, which I'm learning. But from that video the other day, the knife in that is 4.2 millimeters thick. So it's a really thick blade, but it's got a really long bevel on it. And I think the whole convex, flat grinds, all those things have been different, which I've kind of been picking up on. I've used flex cut knives for years and years, but I tend now to use more, I really like the Swiss-made file knives, or feel. I don't know how you guys pronounce them.
We pronounce it file. It's Swiss-made.
Yeah.
We sell them at a store here called Woodcraft. So yes.
Yeah. So I basically use those Swiss-made knife chisels, and when I do a puppet, I use the full-size chisels. When I do a walking stick head, I use the palm chisels. So, it's what works kind of thing, really. But yeah, I've definitely noticed a couple of things with regards to that. The different shapes of the blades and knives and makers and all that kind of stuff. I've started picking up on as well, and things, and I really like
I want to ask a question about the marionettes, because I'm really intrigued by that. As Dave mentioned, we don't have much of that here in the States. Do you have any good reference books that you would recommend for anybody who's interested in marionettes?
The the best and probably a lot of you guys. How can I explain this? If you guys have experience in wood carving, there is only one book I would advise you getting. If you're a complete novice and a beginner to wood carving, and there may be people that are on here who are relatively new to it, there's a different book I'd recommend. So there's a simpler book called Simple Marionettes, or Carving Simple Marionettes, and it's by John Roberts, and it's really, really straightforward. You can make a really simple marionette like this, okay? But it's designed to be like an overview book, so it doesn't go into masses of details. It shows you photographs, and that's about it. The book that I would recommend if you want a comprehensive book and you can't attend one of his workshops is John Roberts does his own book, which is classed as a workshop manual, and it's ring bound or spiral bound in a hard cover. It's A5 in a little case, and in fact, I'll go and get it off the shelf downstairs. Is that okay, guys? 2 seconds, yeah?
Please.
While he's going away, I'll say this real quick. I was talking about knives a few minutes ago. I think we're going to have Rich and Holly Smithson from Helvey on next week. So they'll be able to talk more about the grinds and the knives and get into a little more detail than probably what you've seen on Facebook and Instagram. So plan on seeing Rich and Holly here next week.
And with that being said, guys, if you guys have anyone you would like to hear or get us to have on as a presentation, send Blake or myself or the International Woodcarvers page your suggestions for that as well.
Hey, Tom.
Hey.
So this is the book that I would recommend, and you have to order it directly from John Roberts. So you're going to need to get it from a web page. So his web page is www.puppetcraft.co.uk, and he does send it internationally. I've checked this for someone in the past before, and it's basically like a folder. It's only small, but it's a comprehensive step-by-step of how to carve a marionette. It's all in black and white, but it's very detailed.
Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you for sharing.
And this is a fantastic book. I think it was about £40 over here, so I don't know, $50. But this is the book I would definitely recommend. And of course, the other thing is that if you don't want to buy a book, but you just want to have a look at maybe some step-by-steps or get hold of some blanks or something, there is a company called Puppets in Prague. And if you go onto their website, there is some like little tutorial things on the top, and it basically has a heading that says how to make a puppet. And it's an overview of the 20-day course they do. It's all pictures, but like I say, you guys have some experience in woodworking, you'll be able to make up the gaps and kind of go from there, really. Does that help? Yeah.
Perfect.
Hey, Rich.
Yeah.
I've got a message or a question from the chat asking if you can move the arms independently on the Czech puppets from Joe McMullen's daughter.
Yeah. So.
Point her out, Joe.
So yeah, you can move the arms independently because they're on their own strings. Is this one knotted? So now you can make the puppet wave. Or the other hand in this one is holding a fiddle made of gold, because we all know that Charlie Daniels song, Never Went Down to Georgia. So you can move them independently. Yeah. Anything else? Did that answer it?
I have a question about, sorry, you talked about your flamingo being an easy one-day carve. If somebody's wanting to do something, what would you recommend would be an easy puppet to start with?
I'm going to do a couple, quite a few people have contacted me over social media recently, interested in making some wooden puppets. And I'm trying to think of the most basic things to start with. So I'm going to make, it's not going to be a strung puppet, so it's not going to have strings, but I'm going to make a small fish puppet over the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to video that on Facebook Live so people can watch. Something like a little piranha or something where it's on a wire and you move the wire and it moves. I'm also doing a step-by-step carving a bird on a Wednesday. I do this thing called Whittle Wednesdays. So over here it's between 7 p.m. And 9 p.m. It's usually about an hour long, just a little whittle. But there is a book called Simple Marionettes by John Roberts, and that has a simple bird puppet in it, and there's no carving involved. It's literally just cutting shapes out using a bandsaw or a fret saw or you know, a coping saw, and then basically just attaching some strings. The flamingo's really simple. Like I say, the bird puppet I'm doing at the moment is something along those lines.
Where else would you like to study if you could go anywhere in the world?
I'd like to, it's a weird one. I've seen loads of different puppets. I really like shadow puppetry with paper and things. I have some friends out in the States that do that kind of thing. I think I'd probably want to go to maybe like China and have a look at their traditional style puppetry, Japan or something like that, where you have that really elaborate, detailed puppetry with all the embroidery and inlaying and all that kind of stuff in the costumes. I should probably say that I'm quite fortunate that I have a wife who's a costume maker. So if I have any questions with costumes, my wife helps me out quite a lot with that.
Is there a way of thinking of the position of the strings? Does that change from Czech to English as to where you would put the contact point?
Yeah. So basically, you need to think about the movement of what you're doing. So once you've worked out what your character or your puppet is actually doing, you then play around with it. And a trick that I tend to have done and learned is I will kind of generally fix a string to either a forearm or back of a hand. If I want the leg to rise, I'll attach it to the top half of the leg, not the lower part of the leg. It's a difficult one because they are different. Like this puppet here has a tail, so it has to have its own wire, so the tail can independently move. On the leg, there's a little gold eyelet you can see at the top of the leg. Now that gold eyelet lifts the entire leg. The bottom's free swinging, if you can see it swings independently. If I had the gold eyelet on the bottom, it wouldn't work the same because you'd get friction. It would keep it taut like this. So every time the leg lifted, it would be like it was marching rather than it naturally lifting its leg like the natural movement of a human being. Well, obviously, that's not a human leg. For any of you guys who are wondering that, that's not what my legs look like. But basically, it all depends on that. Like this arm, for example, has the string on the top of the hand here, so that I can keep the hand straight when I lift the string. But on, say, sorry, I'm talking to my puppets.
If they don't talk back to you, Richard, you're fine.
I know. But on the female puppet, her string comes from not there on the hand. It comes from there. So through the center of the hand, because I didn't want the hands to come up like this. I wanted her hands, as she's a dancer, to come up like this. So I move the position depending on what movement I actually want the puppet to do.
And does that affect your choice of joint? Because I know some of them you had you talked about the cordage and then the flap, and then it looked like on the Humpty Dumpty there were pins as the joints.
Yeah, so on the Humpty Dumpty, it combines all of those processes you just discussed. So it has like a leather joint here on the shoulder. It's actually string because I didn't have leather at the time, but that would be a leather joint. That would be a leather elbow with the flat leather. And then there's a leather joint in the wrist. But those pins you see are how I keep the strings in place, how I keep it all in place while I'm working on it and checking it. Like on this hand, for example, if I was to take this pin out, you would see there's the string, there's the hand. So that slots over the top of the string, and then a pin goes through it to lock it in place. And then that's how I position it. And I make these little T-pins that you might just about see. I make these out of piano wire. It was something I learned from John. That's the other thing I use quite a bit. If I'm going to do a carving and I got a carving of someone holding a balloon and the balloon's floating away, so it's taut, I won't use garden wire because you get the kinks in it. I would use piano wire so it looks like it's taut and tight. But it's very sharp, so you have to be careful.
So Rich, you mentioned that it was, you get different points in puppets. Would you have a puppet that had points you could change, or would you just make a different puppet to do a different thing?
That's a really good question, because I haven't done it myself, but I know people who have done puppets with interchangeable parts. And what they'll do is, so say for example, they'll do one body, which will be a standard, let's just say a standard man's body, to the neck. And then they will embed an earth magnet in the bottom of the neck, and then a magnet onto the hole in the chest, so that they basically just snap together. So they can put multiple heads on one body, so they can use the puppets for more things. So magnets is something that people use quite a bit. The other option is, remember that if you've got a puppet and it's got a big pin going through the side here into a head on a loop, you can technically just do different heads as long as the loops are all the same. This puppet here has got a spinner on it, on the handle. So it allows me to turn the puppet on the spot. So I can get it to roll in. He's supposed to look really sad. So he rolls in and then stops on the spot, and then there's a twist on the spot. And all that is just I bent the wire through a handle. So the wire just goes up and bends and goes through. So it's that positioning thing. Like the question you had about where, with the positioning of the strings earlier, if you look at the head on this guy, you could just see, if I lift his hair up, there's his eyelets under his hair. So this guy's only got very limited movement. His head can only do this. And his neck is made solely of leather. So there's no wooden neck in this guy. It's just a strip of leather from his head to his chest or to his body. So he's got lots of movement side by side. And then this little ruff covers that so you don't see it. So that's all you get with this guy. And there's no wrist joint. All this is a wire on a pin. So it bends back and forth this way. I was going to do an upper arm, and I made it out of fabric originally. And then I found that the tension and the friction between this movement and it going forward and backwards just stopped when I had the fabric on there. Just didn't work. even though it was bagged out. So I just removed it. So he kind of has floating arms in some respect. And also this has a through joint on the knee. So this is where you can see, you actually it's like, I call it a Pinocchio joint. You can see all the fixings all the way through the little mortise and tenon. Where on the Devil, he has a concealed knee. So you can't see the workings of his knee until you bend it, and then you can see it. It stops, so you can't see it from the front.
And Richard, when you do the joints and you use leather in the joints, what ounce leather are you using? Are you using like a 2-ounce leather, something really light, or, I mean, the thickness of the leather?
The thickness of the leather, it depends really. If I'm doing the round leather I use is usually 6 mil, maybe 1/4 inch, 6 mil. Although I do have loads of different thicknesses depending on what I'm going to be doing. And I buy it like this, but then I have, that's thinner then, so I have the thinner one. So this is like a 3 mil. This is maybe like a 6.5 mil. And then when I actually do the flat leather, this in here, that's the tongue out of an old pair of boots. So I just cut the tongue out of an old pair of blue Dr. Martin boots that the sole had gone on them. It was time for them to go to the place in the sky where all the other boots go to when they lose their sole. And I basically just cut the tongue out of them and reuse them. Or if I see a sofa on the side of the road that someone's getting rid of and they're waiting for the trash guy to come and collect it, and I just cut the back out of it with a pocket knife and run.
It works.
Little note for that as well, for getting like the offcuts of leather. I got them off of Amazon for, well, here it's £5, so
Yeah.
$6 or so, and bags and bags full. There's loads of it in there. It's really good, like for that sort of thing.
If you can't find leather, like round leather for doing the joints, then I have used just thick string, like thick bootlaces, round bootlaces. Just remember that when you cut them, seal the ends with the cigarette lighter to stop them from unraveling. A bit like with paracord or something. And I've used that before on joints and it works absolutely fine. I think the key thing is that if you're going to do a soft joint, which is a leather joint, just make sure you don't paint in there, because if the paint gets on the leather, it makes it harder to bend. So what I tend to do is if I'm going to do an arm and the arm is red of the creature or the character, I will try and find a red or a brown leather so it's less obvious, rather than putting white or veg tan in there or something. And when I do this is a joint I like to say I learned from doing the courses in the UK. And when I do this joint, I just cut it round, put it on the bandsaw this way around, cut the slot straight on the center on the bandsaw, about an inch, and then I take a massive oversized strip of leather, piece 4 inches square maybe, and I glue that in, wiggling it into the slot, and I make it bigger because I've got more pressure to pull it into the slot. And then once it's dried, I then do the other side, and then I might end up with leather this wide, and then I'll trim it off with the scissors afterwards. Because if you've got little tiny fiddly pieces, it doesn't work. I haven't got it here, but the flamingo's legs are currently off the flamingo. So on the knee joint of the flamingo, I did this joint for Lance's knee. But of course, the flamingo's leg bends the opposite way to, a flamingo's leg is like our arms. It bends forward. So rather than like our legs that bend backwards. So the pressure of that and putting it down just wore and wore and wore, and I put too little amount of leather in it, and it just went. So I've learned for future now to kind of extend that a bit more. I think it's a bit like when you guys do you do your carvings of your heads and your characters and your busts and so on for character carving and so on. And you just got to have some understanding of anatomy. And then once you understand whether it's like a ball joint or a hinge joint, that's where I kind of work it as. If it's like your shoulder joint and it's a ball joint, excellent. If it's like your elbow joint, your elbow can't go all the way around. It's actually the wrist that's doing it. So that becomes a hinge joint. It goes back and forth. Then the wrist is like a 360 ball joint. So you think about what those particular joints are, and a flat piece of leather works well on the arm for doing a forearm, for doing a bend and an elbow, but a round piece of leather wouldn't work as well because it would turn in both directions, and then that causes issues. So it's kind of understanding the anatomy and the kind of structure of the subject matter, I guess.
Hey, Rich, let me jump in here real quick. We're running up on an hour and a half since we started.
I'm sorry, I can talk for Wales.
No, you're fine. We're going to ask Larry Green to stop the video at this point so that we can go ahead and upload it so that it's not too long. I think the system only allows us a certain amount. So before we do that, we just want to thank you for your time and for explaining all the things that you have to us today. Thanks for agreeing to come on with us. And everybody can stay on and continue to talk to Rich after we get finished shutting it down here. We'll leave the system up for a while, but he'll need to stop recording at this point. So thanks again.
Well, no problem at all. Thanks for having me and inviting me. I appreciate it.
Sure, we'll do it again next week.